Thanks everybody for joining. My name is Sean Ginnivan. I work on the Android Enterprise team at Google, and our team is basically responsible for the success of the Android platform in business-to-business scenarios. So if you're looking to build applications, mobilize employees, do new experiences in those kind of enterprise settings, that's what our team builds features for. And we've really seen the Android platform evolve over the last couple of years. And we've seen the market evolve more broadly as well toward this kind of broad theme of digital transformation, which is a very loaded term, but I think it's one that we certainly see as top of mind in the market today. And this is not just from anecdotal conversations with customers, it's also from conversations that we see happening with leading industry analysts, with large consultancies. In fact, our friends at Accenture ran a survey and found that 78% of enterprises expect their organizations to be a digital business in the next 3 years. So obviously lots of expectation there on the horizon. And Gartner actually cites that in a different survey that 42% of CEOs have already begun their digital transformation journey. So I can already tell by some quizzical looks in the crowd, there's a, what the heck are you talking about? What's a digital business? And what we see ultimately, even here at the show, is the rise of the intersection of three major trends. So when we ask what is digital, it's really the nexus, to me anyway, of three things. Certainly things, which maybe I shouldn't have prefaced things with things. The idea here is that objects inside of our organization are increasingly being connected. We're going and connecting smart machines inside factories for a lot of use cases. We're connecting even boxes of goods in the transportation cycle in retail. Lots of connectivity of those objects is happening, and the cloud is driving data analytics to allow you to gain more insight. And certainly that trend has been talked about a lot here at Cloud Next, but there's another aspect that we don't always talk about, which is people. Using the data generated by those things to actually make that data actionable and fulfill a broader process inside of an organization. Now, I think that's sort of the abstract way of looking at what a digital business is. I think it's actually useful to use an actual example of what a digital business might be. And if you were to start a grocery store from scratch, blank sheet of paper, in my mind, what you would do is you'd build Ocado. Ocado is an online grocer in the United Kingdom. You order your groceries online. All your fulfillments happened behind the scenes. They deliver the groceries to your doorstep. They use machine learning to do everything from understand what their supply chain looks like to actually understand customer service, what emails need to be responded to in real time within the organization. They actually use robots inside of their warehouse to improve efficiency, and all those robots generate data as well into BigQuery and cloud machine learning. So this is actually what an Ocado grocery store looks like. It looks like, unlike any other grocery store you and I have walked into, certainly not here in the United States, and you can see the robots that they have traversing all the little bins to pick up your milk and your juice and whatnot. And so this is very cool. Like, the nerds in us love this idea. But the fact of the matter is, if you're a business and you're staring down Ocado and you're saying, how am I going to compete with this? You're not going to be able to start from scratch. Lots of us have existing businesses that we're trying to go and run today while still providing a competitive advantage. And so one way to think about this is, just because there's not, you yourselves are not a digital native, doesn't mean that there isn't a digital experience that you can provide for your customers. And so if why isn't a digital business, can't you just snap your fingers and be a digital business day one? Well, there's a few reasons that I see when I talk to customers. And one is, many of you have established business models inside of your organization. You can't necessarily, if you're Nordstrom, say, I'm closing down all my retail stores, I'm all in on online. Many of you likely already have legacy infrastructure. There's on-prem or on-prem tools that are being moved to the cloud that are driving existing processes in your organization that are critical. Some of them may not be run by you within IT. There's a whole operations technology team that has a very hands-off-my-stuff kind of culture. And frankly, there's a lot of organizational challenges that we see as headwinds toward the broader theme of digital business. They don't necessarily have the resources and processes that allow for effective cross collaboration. Now, in the talk today, I'm not an organizational psychologist. I really can't tackle point 3 very well, but we'll try and talk a little bit about ways we can address points 1 and 2 as you look toward how to evolve our businesses into competing in the digital economy. So one way to think about this is many organizations today are hybrid digital businesses. In other words, you have an existing customer-facing business model that is generating revenue, generating profit, and you're building digital processes to compete with the digital natives like Amazon and others. And if we think about this in a retail example, there's obviously lots of different ways that the traditional retailer works today. You likely have warehouses that are handling all the goods that you're stocking to go and have your consumers go and buy. You have customer service agents that are going and picking up the phone and addressing issues when something goes wrong. Not that that ever happens. And obviously, you have brick and mortar stores inside of your organization that are trying to drive new experiences as well. And finally, there's customer interactions that we have to consider. So each one of these functions, when we start to look at them individually, can actually have really great digital processes built into them. And it doesn't necessarily mean let's go and slap Wi-Fi beacons and Bluetooth LE and all this other stuff into every nook and cranny of these different silos. So if we start to think about how do we go and digitize each one of those processes, one of the ways that I see customers doing this is using mobile as a nexus to gather data and drive processes away from paper or even traditional computers and into more of a digital process. Stock inventory, we can go and gather that data in near real time by making sure that the right computing infrastructure is at the hands of our employees who are having to work in the back-end warehouse. Customer experience, particularly as more retailers move into omni-channel experiences, which are a mix of e-commerce and brick and mortar, need to have access to a lot of that digital experience at their fingertips as they deal with the consumer that's standing in front of them. And certainly we're all aware of tools like Square and other point of sale, which are all being increasingly moved into digital platforms as well. And this is not me making it up, right? This is actually something we saw Marks and Spencer do in the UK, which is another large UK retailer who's having to compete with Ocado. They're actually facing this reality. And so what they did was they looked at their existing processes and they asked themselves, how do we go through and digitize a lot of those processes on the back end without throwing the baby out with the bathwater? And so they actually deployed Android devices into the hands of all of their employees in the brick and mortar stores. And they were able to go and do things like stock counting, price checking. They actually unlocked a lot of customer engagement. One actual tangential benefit they found was when a person came up to them and said, a consumer came up to an employee and said, hey, where's the milk? How much milk is there? The retail associate was able to go and pull out their mobile device, look that up on the back end in real time, say, hey, I don't have milk for you, but we do at the store at the next high street over. And if you've ever been to London, there's a Marks and Spencer on like every corner. It's like CVS here in San Francisco. And so that drove a lot of better customer engagement, but they were also able to look that consumer up and said, did you know that you have 10 pounds left on your rewards card? Can I go and actually help you use that today? So they were driving a lot of loyalty and making that consumer engagement much stickier, keeping the consumer engaged and reducing the risk that that person was going to turn to a pure digital channel, probably most likely on their smartphone because they couldn't find the good that they were looking for. And this has been rolled out across 600 stores in the UK, and they looked at each one of these processes and they were building miniature app experiences around them. So they actually built 26 different applications to make sure that the right time experience was available and optimized to the people that were executing those processes on the back end. Now, 2 years ago, this would be called mobile first. 2 years ago, we were sort of talking as an industry that mobile was going to change everything, and mobile was going to go and transform the way we work. And I think, to borrow a term from Gartner, we're in that trough of disillusionment. Lots of mobile kind of happened. We didn't necessarily see the benefits we wanted from an industry perspective, and now we're on to the next thing. Like, what's the next new shiny object and new technology that we can go and adopt? In fact, there's a lot of, and we see this on the Android team and in the enterprise customers and partners that we work with, there's a lot of mobile that's already out there. Many organizations have deployed smartphones and tablets for the purposes of email and communications. And there's benefit there. I'm not to say that email on all the time is not beneficial, but that's not going to necessarily truly transform a business process in the organization. Rolling out email to the folks at Marks & Spencer makes them more collaborative, I suppose, but it doesn't let me engage the customer and answer the question, do you have this pair of pants in size 38 in black? And if you don't, can you get it on my doorstep the next morning? There's also lots of legacy architectures out there. Many of you have likely worked in mobile prior to the iPhone. And so we see a lot of Windows Mobile deployments out there. We even see Palm deployments out there, and Palm's not a company anymore. But the fact of the matter is, these deployments exist, and they're running a lot of business processes on the back end. The challenge that I think each one of us in this room face is that these are all platforms that are soon to be end of life. Palm is certainly been end of life already. Windows Mobile is due to be sunset in 2020. And so now is the opportunity for those of you that have built business processes on more legacy architectures to not be focusing on how do I port a lot of my legacy apps and do the exact same thing on an Android or an iPhone. Can you go to they'll run a mic up to you. We'll do questions at the. Sure. Uh-huh. Yep. 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 Sure. Yep. 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 Yeah, so I'll engage with you on this on the back end, but the broader sure. Yep. Absolutely, happy to tackle that. And the question for those on the recording was, how do you think about mobile first and mobile only? And I actually think what I'll talk about as we think about this from an architecture perspective is there is no truth on this topic. There should not be religion. One should not be sitting there and saying, we're only going to do mobile. Or we're only going to do this platform. We're only going to do that platform. We'll talk about that in a minute. A lot of organizations also, looked at really limited sets of applications. They went through and did kind of basic punch lists. They brought out the company directory, and that was useful. But again, these are not necessarily so transformative that you're going to build a business process. It is really useful that I can look up my peers on the Android team wherever I am, but that is not necessarily unlocking business value for my consumers and my constituents. So as you think about mobile and what does our mobile strategy need to be, and where does this intersection actually exist with the broader theme of digital, IoT, cloud, and big data, one way to think about this is that mobile should be the presentation layer to the digital processes that you want to build inside of your organization. So let me give you an example of smart manufacturing. Has anybody here heard the words predictive analytics, predictive maintenance, and manufacturing used at this show today. Lots of nods. So this is actually very, very transformative for folks that are in manufacturing. Lots of organizations are looking at ways to gather data for analytics for manufacturing, understanding how goods and services are moving within the supply chain, make sure that I have the right time components to actually create assembled goods. Certainly, we're looking at things like what's the performance of the machines going on inside of my organization, and using that data to understand where failures may occur and getting in front of them before they stop the manufacturing line and cause issues on the back end. And certainly on delivery and inventory, optimizing those processes, making sure that the right goods and services are ending up at the consumer on the back end. IoT is incredibly powerful for all these. The cloud is incredibly powerful for all these. This is not a smokestack, it's a cloud. Get the joke? So the idea here is that there's a lot of things that we can go and gather, and IoT is a way to go and gather a lot of that data in real time and then crunch that data on the back end. But mobile is not going to just be the presentation layer for how these digital tools exist. It's also going to be the technology that makes these processes and makes this technology actionable by people. So if we drill down to the smart manufacturing example, I can gather a lot of data about my manufacturing output. I can optimize my output to make sure that I'm not channel stuffing and putting too many goods into the channel. I can go and optimize the workers I have on the back end. The people that are doing that work and analyzing those machine learning models and analyzing the output need to have the right platforms and the right experiences available to them. And in a lot of cases, that's not going to necessarily be mobile as we think about it. It's actually going to be a guy with a desktop or a keyboard and a monitor, because I need to be able to visualize lots of data, and I need to be able to manipulate that data very effectively. The folks that are looking at predictive maintenance, at the end of the day, have to go maintain the machine, right? It's not much good if I go through and say, hey, that machine's not about to break, and then no guy goes and actually does anything to address the piece of the machine that's about to fail. So we need to make sure that that person has the right tools in their pocket to know where that failure is going to occur, and more importantly, what's the process necessary to actually address where that failure could happen. And so we want to make sure that that person has the right device, the right platform at their disposal. And finally, when you look at things like delivery and inventory, at the end of the day, Bluetooth and LoRa and a lot of these IoT technologies can be incredibly powerful for large sets of goods, but when we get to actual goods in the back end that are not particularly expensive, like, I don't know, heads of lettuce, barcode scanners still are a really, really easy way to get that data about what's going on, what's stocked where, into my back-end order inventory systems and also into the point of sale. So we need to go through and think about, as the people who actually have to execute these processes are executing them, how do we make sure that they actually have the right experiences in their pocket as we're gathering all this data, sending it to the cloud, and hopefully a miracle occurs and people are actually able to execute that process. But this isn't also just about IoT. I think a lot of us make a logical leap as technologists toward IoT as the solution, but we see in a lot of ways that mobile is a very, very effective way to start gathering data without necessarily scaling up an entire IoT deployment. There are tons and tons of sensors that exist inside mobile devices today. Not just connectivity sensors like cellular and Wi-Fi, but also positioning sensors like GPS, proximity, NFC, Bluetooth, the camera itself. All of these can be used to unlock business processes inside of your organization. Let me give you an example. If you're going through and have NFC sensors inside a lot of your goods, we could go through and connect the sensor into every pallet inside of my delivery truck. I could put a GPS sensor inside the delivery truck, and I could gather all of that sensor data and send it to the cloud. That's actually going to be really effective, and it's going to be incredibly scalable. But how do I start getting those benefits today? Well, putting an actual mobile device into that truck gets me the GPS positioning sensor about the truck, allows the delivery driver to go and use NFC tags or other Bluetooth tags from the mobile device to gather the same sorts of data that would have been gathered in the delivery truck in real time had we approached this as an IoT problem. So when you're thinking about this from a mobile perspective, don't overlook the sheer amount of sensor data that can be gathered simply by having employees who are driving a particular process with the right mobile devices at hand. So when you're thinking about building a digital journey, there's a few questions we can ask to catalyze these projects and be successful. And one is to say, can I gather better data today with mobile and apps and progressively automate that through IoT? So I can actually start experimenting today with sensors, with tools like Bluetooth LE, like tools like Wi-Fi beacons, and I can use mobile technologies as a way to get my toe in the water without going and building a massive IoT deployment on the back end. Another critical question is, can I actually expose data that I already have inside of my organization to drive a better customer experience? Inventory tracking is an example in retail. You already have a lot of that data in the point of sale. You know how many goods are coming in because you're doing stock picking, and you know how many goods are going out because hopefully they're being scanned by the point of sale system. Otherwise, you have a massive shoplifting problem. And so going through and exposing that data to your customer service associates allows them to offer a similar digital experience to say, how much is in stock, where is this particular item, and actually, you can then connect that out to the cloud and into your e-commerce sites. You can start to look in real time, hey, before I go to the store, is the pair of pants I want going to be there? And finally, can I simplify processes using digital technologies in my workforce? Anything that is based on paper inside of your organization should have probably been digitized a while ago. Many, many, many organizations have not even tackled that part of the journey. So looking at like where is data entry can be done more effectively is really important. So I want to come back to the Windows Mobile point. And really, I think the broader question was, hey, when we think about mobile first or mobile only or digital, like how are you actually making sure that the right experience is ending up in the hands of the right person? And from a Google perspective, we believe ultimately that diversity is our strength. That we can offer organizations who are building out digital processes and digital experiences a wide array of form factors and even price points to enable that digital journey. That extends everything from a $50 Android Go device in emerging markets because, and I've heard this from customers, carrying a $500 or $1,000 flagship phone will get you mugged in a lot of countries. And it's probably not the right platform to be building your digital journey from. Laptops can actually be enabled on that same code base. One of the very cool things that have been announcing here at CloudNext is that not only are Chromebooks supporting Android apps, which we announced at I/O 2017, but Managed Google Play, the app distribution mechanism for custom applications inside of your organization, which has already proved scalable on the Android platform, is now available for Chrome OS as well. And what that means for you as folks who are actually building experiences is that you can have one code base that extends from a smartphone all the way into a ruggedized tablet for the folks who are out in the field, all the way into a barcode scanner for folks that need those extra peripherals, all the way into the laptop that's sitting on somebody's desk who has to manipulate all this data on the back end. And so you can reuse a lot of that same engineering expertise in technologies like Java and Kotlin, irrespective of the form factors that may be carried inside of somebody as a part of somebody's job. We're even seeing Android being used for a lot of custom engineering. Pitney Bowes is a great example. We talked about them here at this show. They set out to go and digitize the postage meter, which for many of you may seem like a fairly boring topic. How much does my mail weigh and how much is it going to cost? But they actually really wanted to transform that experience for office workers. And generally, that was a custom engineering effort that would cost lots and lots of money to build that sort of integrated embedded system. Using the tools in Android and using the over-the-air technologies like we have, like the Android Management API, they were able to take an off-the-shelf tablet, lock it down into a custom experience with their own custom applications, and that tablet looks like you're just running custom hardware, even though it's stock Google Android on the back end, saving them a ton of engineering and development costs, and also unlocking the tools of things like Google Play to deliver applications onto that tablet. And what that actually allows the end user to do is say, not only how much does this piece of postage weigh, but how much is it going to cost, who can get it there most quickly, and actually then print the postage from DHL, UPS, the postage service, et cetera. So when you're thinking about this from a platform selection perspective, there's a lot of really cool things you can do that are very interactive that may feel like custom hardware that Android and Chrome today can support out of the box. Now, any of you who are running in an engineering firm, I think we talked about the false dichotomy of on-prem and cloud here at the show, and Urs talked about that in his keynote. I actually see the same conversation happening around developers. Progressive web or native? Which do I choose? And the fact of the matter is, we believe that whether you're building for web or building for native, you can have one code base that can be supported across all the different platform types, all the different form factors, and all the different price points that we talked about. And that's because Google Play is available now everywhere across all the end user computing devices that we have, as well as Chrome is available everywhere. So if you're looking toward things like service workers and progressive web apps and webhooks as a technology, Chrome is richly supported across all the platforms as well. I mentioned legacy systems is a critical concern for a lot of customers, and for those of you that have lots of legacy Windows out there, we work very closely across both Chrome and Android with partners like Citrix and VMware to deliver VDI solutions that allow those Windows apps to be brought out to the end user. And this is a really easy way to extend apps that may be used casually, may not need an optimized mobile experience, but are still critical when they're critical. Anybody heard of machine learning before? Okay, thank you for everybody for raising your hand. Thank you for those that laughed at my joke. Again, we think about this as a false dichotomy, but we really at Google have been focused on delivering machine learning tools out to whatever code base you decide to build in. So in the native world, that's TensorFlow Lite, which we delivered last year and is also being talked a lot about in the IoT Edge conversations from an IoT perspective. But two lesser-known things that we've announced are, one is MLKit. So anybody who's building in Firebase today can use machine learning models that are pre-trained by Google directly in your code base. And it simplifies a lot of the machine learning kind of ramp up, if you will, because you're not having to build custom models for standard things like computer vision, speech-to-text, and the like. We also announced TensorFlow.js earlier this year. So if you're building for web and you want to build offline models for machine learning and build custom models that you deploy out to the edge, you can use actually web as a technology to do that. And finally, for those of you that are building on platforms like Android and building for native, we also introduced the Android Neural Networks API. So if you're concerned about things like performance, traditionally that meant you had to know that a Huawei device had a Ryzen chip and you had to go and build against their SDK to optimize your computer vision deployment, and then rinse, lather, repeat for everybody else that was building machine learning chips. The Neural Networks API abstracts a lot of that for you, so you can actually go through and look and say, hey, if there's a TensorFlow optimized processor on this device, use that. If not, use the GPU. If not that, use the CPU. And so we do what we can to optimize the hardware and abstract that optimization away from you as developers. We've seen a 10x improvement in some of the object recognition tests in conjunction with Huawei when we look at their devices. And so we're really pleased with the platform performance improvements that the Neural Networks API provides. Now, why not just do all my machine learning in the cloud and send everything there and train my models there and actually do the analysis there? Well, the fact of the matter is, and these are actually reasons that come from my peers who work on IoT, these are equally applicable to mobile. One is, real-time computer vision. How do I actually go through and look at an object and say, that's what that particular SKU is? So if you're training people and getting them up to speed in sort of those customer-facing environments, they can use things like augmented reality to go and gain that institutional knowledge that they might not have had as they're starting inside of an organization. Same thing with spoken language. If I'm a field services person and I'm working for the cable company and somebody's yelling at me in Vietnamese or Spanish, I speak neither language, but I can use machine learning and translation to have some of that feedback brought back to me and translate back to the person on the other side. Certainly, there's privacy paradigms. You may not want to send all data to the cloud. You may want to send a sample model out to the cloud, train it there, and then deliver the custom model out to the edge where you can process it independently. This is particularly if you're working around things like PII, if you live in Europe or work in sensitive verticals like healthcare. And finally, connectivity is really important. There's a couple of demos here at the show where you take a picture and it gives you a machine learning estimate for car damage. Unfortunately, Wi-Fi has not been perfect here, and so the response time for that demo wasn't what it could have been. And so building out a machine learning model that runs at the edge increases the responsiveness of that application experience because I'm not sending the data all the way to the cloud, processing it, sending it back. So if I'm particularly in a far-off land where 3G isn't even available or there's really spotty coverage, using machine learning at the edge allows me to deliver that business value without necessarily having to have persistent connectivity. And so just some use case examples here. Anomaly detection with product quality. We certainly see lots of examples of smart cameras being used. Lots of that, not only just for anomaly detection, but even for things like stock counting. Some of the work that Trax is doing downstairs and cameras is really very cool. And I think in a lot of cases, smart cameras are the way to start that, but you can use mobile cameras and mobile devices as a way to start training those models and gathering the data before you go all in on the back end. We talked about predictive maintenance, and if anybody is not aware of what's happening in autonomous vehicles, please go stand on the corner here and watch an autonomous vehicle get confused by a stoplight. So we've sort of covered a lot of ground, and I wanted to make sure that there were some key takeaways that we wrapped up with as a part of this conversation. And the calls to action I would think of, if you're beginning this digital journey, really start with identifying the data you have that can make employees more productive. Not everything needs to be about gathering new sets of data and sending it out for analysis. You likely have lots of data that's locked up in silos like SAP or other vertical application platforms. And just as a plug to my friends at SAP, they've actually released a lot of really rich mobile tools to develop SAP applications in SAP Cloud for Android. Once you know what you have, it's also important to know what you want. What in my process is missing when I engage with a consumer? Is there additional data that I could be going and reading from? Is there additional data that my analytics team in the back office could be using? Is there additional data that would make a process more efficient inside of my organization? And you can start to field test a lot of this to say, okay, well, if I gather this data, is it actually going to gather value? We talked about the sensor technologies that exist in mobile. Mobile's a really easy way to start gathering that data and running trials with folks that are in the field already inside of your organization, and then automate and scale that using IoT. Also, mobile and apps can advance your digital strategy because, as we talked about earlier, mobile is going to be the presentation layer to a lot of that digital data. Mobile is also going to be the way that data becomes actionable and allows your employees to make the right time, right decision with the data that they have at their fingertips. When you're picking client platforms from an investment perspective in this digital journey, you want to be looking for a diversity of form factor and price. Not every device is right for every user inside of your organization. But at the end of the day, and this has been a talk that's been here at the show, all workers are cloud workers. All workers need real-time access to data to be able to go and make the decisions on behalf of your organization. So you want to make sure that those people inside of your organization are enabled with the right form factors that allow them to be productive. And that can be a mix of both Android and Chrome. because there are a lot of cases where laptops are going to be the right form factor, but you want to build against common code bases inside of your organization. There is likely a skills gap inside of your organization. And so be looking at building out the skills inside of your organization around things like mobile technologies and web, and use both where appropriate. Where I often see that trade-off is both hardware access. So if your application needs things like barcode scanning or rich access to other third-party peripherals, web may not be the right tool for you. If you need a lot of offline support, so if you're working with a lot of data sets inside of your applications that expand beyond 50 megs, which we all know you'll blow through 50 megs when you start doing things like image processing, you want to be able to start looking toward native. The point here is that you can actually mix and match a lot of these technologies, because looking up things like stock count, you probably don't need offline support because you're in a retail environment with persistent Wi-Fi that's high speed. You can use web and online as the model to follow. So look at kind of both technologies and figure out which is appropriate based on the use cases that you're focused on. Obviously, this also, we're here at Next, so building out your cloud strategy is critical. And what I mean by this is you want to assume anytime, anywhere access to the data. As you go and provide supercomputer power inside people's pockets, going through and saying you must be in the four walls of the office is not going to work from an employee enablement perspective. So be working from the assumption that anytime, anywhere access to data is going to be the model that your organization follows. And there's lots of work that Google has been doing in the Beyond Corp project to show kind of what zero trust networks and what intelligent proxies can do to provide that access without necessarily relying on more heavyweight remote access technologies. And all of these things start to then lay a really, really strong foundation for your organization to be either serially or in parallel, pursuing for IoT, pursuing a foundation for IoT. When you've started to understand what data do I want, what is that automated sensor going to be gathering, what should I be focusing on, what data do people need to have access to? In other words, what applications are going to be providing visibility over the data that those sensors are providing, and assuming that scale, those IoT sensors are ultimately going to augment, enhance, and automate the process that you've built using mobile technologies and other end-user compute tools that Google has. So then none of this is an either-or. You can start to go and really lay this roadmap and journey for your organization to become increasingly digital. So I'm going to pause here. I've got about 10 minutes left. Let me turn it back to you guys for questions.